If you were a US Navy fighter pilot in the 1940s, you almost certainly flew one of these three aircraft: the Wildcat, the Hellcat, or the Bearcat. The evolution of these fighters, all built by Grumman, tell the story of America's Pacific War, barely keeping up in 1942 with the stubby, outgunned F4F Wildcat, turning the tide in 1943 and 1944 with the massive, vastly improved F6F Hellcat, and asserting technological dominance in 1945 with the incredible, lightning-fast F8F Bearcat. So let's take a closer look at how this evolution occurred, how these aircraft differ, and how they each performed against the Japanese. These are the Grumman cats. Long before any of these cats were clawing their way into aviation history, Grumman was busy developing biplanes. Let's rewind to 1931, when this aircraft, the Grumman FF, first took flight. That was then developed into the F2F and F3F, notably still biplane designs. The next fighter was said to be a biplane as well, with work having already begun on the F4F1 in 1935. However, rival firm Brewster had won the attention of the Navy with their new monoplane design, the F2A Buffalo. Not to be outdone in the fat fighter arms race, Grumman scrapped the XF4F1 and converted their design to a monoplane, the XF4F2. This aircraft was still deemed inferior to the Buffalo, which ended up winning the big Navy order. The Grumman design was also ordered, but in smaller numbers. It was largely an insurance policy in case the Buffalo turned out to be rubbish, which, of course, it did. Anyway, in a bid to improve the design, Grumman completely changed the wings and tail structure and fitted an improved engine, the massive R-1830-76 Twin Wasp, a 14-cylinder radial with a 2-stage supercharger. These changes vastly improved the performance of the aircraft, which was adopted in US Navy service as the F4F Wildcat, soon usurping the F2A Buffalo as the Navy's primary carrier-borne fighter. The first orders for the fighter were actually from France, Greece and Great Britain, each ordering their own unique variants. But given the unfortunate timing of the French order, all of these ended up going to the Fleet Air Arm, where they first saw combat in the North Atlantic as the Martlet. When the US entered the war in late 1941, it operated two variants of the Wildcat. The F4F3 was the standard version, and the F4F4 was the upgrade, with 6 50 cal machine guns instead of 4, and the ability to fold its wings back, massively increasing the number of aircraft that could fit onto a carrier. The F4F-4 saw a mixed reception as it was heavier, slower, and carried the same amount of ammo as the F4F3, despite having 50% more guns. This meant less shooting time, which made missing shots much more punishing. Look, I could talk about this aircraft for days. The question is, how did it perform? And importantly, how did it perform against the A6M2 Zero? But first, a word from this video's sponsor, Raycon. It's Raycon's anniversary, and one product is stealing the spotlight, the Essential Open Earbuds, which are currently 30% off. But they're not just affordable, they're sleek, smart, and comfortable. I've talked about various Raycon products, but these are different. They keep your ears open while delivering crystal clear sound from just outside your ear canal. For me, as someone who seems to spend all my life with noise-cancelling buds in my ears or noise-cancelling headphones over them, the Essential Open Earbuds are a breath of fresh air, comfortable, lightweight and convenient, with the multi-angle hook keeping them secure on my head. It's nice going on a walk and being able to not only hear my music, but also hear the rustle of leaves, local wildlife, or my neighbours saying hello. These open earbuds add to the experience instead of replacing it. You really should give them a try. Raycon offers the same premium audio and build quality as other brands, but at half the price. With a 30-day happiness guarantee, what do you have to lose? Go to buyraycon.com/RWFopen to get your 30% discount off the Essential Open Earbuds. Link is in the description. Of course, the Zero was the primary carrier fighter of the Imperial Japanese Navy for the entire war, so naturally it is the yardstick for the three aircraft in this video. First, the Wildcat. The F4F3 Wildcat compared poorly to the A6M2 Zero in terms of a direct dogfight. The Zero had a higher top speed, especially low to the ground, a higher climb rate, a significantly tighter turning circle, better acceleration, and massively longer range. This was a frightening combination for US Navy pilots and their F4Fs. However, the Wildcat had strengths of its own, namely a higher service ceiling and the ability to stay maneuverable even at higher speeds. The four 50 caliber machine guns were a lot easier to use than the mixed 7.7mm and 20mm armament of the Zero. The 20mm had very low muzzle velocity relative to the MGs, making it very difficult to lead shots. Even if the Zero hit the target, the chances were that the Wildcat would stay in the air. See, there's an advantage to being a flying brick. It was a very rugged airframe with thick armour for the pilot and self-sealing fuel tanks, and many Wildcats returned to their carriers with massive amounts of battle damage that would have doomed the unarmoured, lightly constructed Zero. In fact, thanks to excellent training, superior tactics, and a commitment to radio communication, the Wildcat outperformed the Zero on the whole. Historian John Lundstrom states that at Coral Sea, the Wildcat enjoyed a 1.3 to 1 kill ratio against the Zero, which fell to roughly parity at Midway. Improved tactics like the Thatch Weave helped raise this ratio back to 2 to 1 by Guadalcanal in late 1942. The Cats were winning. But as early as 1938, long before the Wildcat had even seen combat, Grumman were already working on a superior design, the F6F Hellcat. The Hellcat was developed from the ground up to enhance the strengths of the Wildcat while addressing some of the aircraft's shortcomings. For example, the narrow, fuselage-mounted and manually cranked landing gear had made the Wildcat precarious at best and dangerous at worst, so this was replaced with a modern hydraulic design, wide set, and folding away neatly into the new low wing. The XF6F1 was a much larger fighter than the F4F, designed around the right R-2600 twin Cyclone, outputting some 1700 horsepower. But following assessments of dogfights between the Zero and the Wildcat in 1942, this engine was deemed not quite powerful enough, and the massive Pratt & Whitney R-2800 Double Wasp was fitted instead. This engine, mounted in the strengthened and redesigned XF6F-3, spat out 2,000 horsepower, giving a performance boost of 25% across the board. Other lessons were incorporated into the Hellcat, like raising the cockpit and sloping the engine cowling to give better visibility to the pilot during landing and takeoff, a key weakness of the rival F4U Corsair. The first production F6F3 Hellcats were flying in October 1942, with the aircraft first reaching operational readiness in February 1943 with the new Essex-class fleet carriers, and first seeing combat in September. Grumman production lines soon switched from Wildcat to Hellcat, but the US Navy's demand for fighters was only increasing, so the decision was made to resume Wildcat production over at General Motors, who built the FM1 and FM2 variants of the aircraft until the end of the war. These later Wildcats, despite being largely obsolete, were small enough to operate on the Navy's growing fleet of escort carriers, performing vital support for landing operations, while the larger Hellcat-toting fleet carriers hunted the Japanese Navy. The Cyclone-powered FM1 and FM2 ended up being, by a significant margin, the most numerous Wildcats produced. Anyway, comparing the Hellcat and Wildcat side by side, we can see the family resemblance, but it also appears that the Hellcat has been eating all the pies. It's a significantly larger and heavier aircraft. In fact, it weighed almost twice as much. They had them sitting next to each other in the American Heritage Museum when I visited this summer, and the difference is surprising. But how did that actually affect their performance? Despite being a larger and heavier airframe, the 2,000 horsepower Double Wasp made the Hellcat not only faster than the Wildcat, but 60 miles per hour faster than the Zero, allowing the Hellcat pilot to dictate when and where the fight would begin, or end. The Hellcat now could outclimb the Zero above 14,000 feet, had a superior roll rate, was faster in level flight and a lot faster in the dive, had 6 50 caliber machine guns with 400 rounds per gun, as well as bulletproof cockpit glass and extra armour for the oil coolers. It's no surprise that the F6F hit the ground running, immediately proving a significantly more dangerous opponent for Japanese pilots, who, at this point in the war, were far less experienced aviators themselves. By the end of the war, the official US Navy record states that the F6F Hellcat scored some 5,200 victories for less than 250 aircraft lost, a kill ratio of 19 to 1. Historians like Barrett Tillman and John Lundstrom suggest this is a pretty large overclaim, but their proposal of a 9 to 1 kill ratio is still pretty extraordinary. Outside of a dogfight, the Hellcat was also a much more versatile airframe. The wider hydraulic landing gear and a new oxygen system made it much easier to fly, and the larger aircraft had significantly longer range than the Wildcat, meaning it could escort attack aircraft far more effectively. It could also operate as an attack aircraft in its own right, armed with 20mm cannons, HVAR or Tiny Tim rockets, 4,000 pounds of bombs, or even a Mark 13 torpedo. Throughout the war, the Hellcat was built in two main variants, the standard F6F-3 and the improved F6F-5, which offered 200 more horsepower as well as the bulletproof windscreen and new ailerons. Both were also built as night fighter variants, the 3N and 5N, with an AN APS-4 radar mounted on the end of the starboard wing. 12,275 Hellcats would be produced over a period of just 2 years. For context, only around 11,000 Zeros were ever completed, despite production starting way back in 1939. And that, kids, is why we do not mess with America's boats. But like all good aircraft manufacturers, Grumman were working on the Hellcat's replacement. To achieve a performance improvement, especially in climb rate, which had been identified as a key metric, they needed a higher power-to-weight ratio. But there was a snag. The double Wasp in the Hellcat was the biggest engine available, so there was no way to increase the power any further. Realizing that a smaller, lighter aircraft was the only option if they wanted better climb rate, Grumman saw that this aircraft could also replace the obsolete Wildcat squadrons on board the escort carriers, if they managed to make it small enough, of course. Inside Grumman, this project was referred to as the F8F Bearcat, and work began in late 1943, just as the Hellcat was flying its first combat sorties. The question was, what were Grumman willing to sacrifice in order to save weight? Well, as it turns out, a lot, like blowing the wings off the plane. But we'll get to that. The first and most basic change was to make the aircraft a lot smaller and reduce the amount of internal fuel it could carry. Compared to the Hellcat, the Bearcat is over 1.5 meters shorter with 2 meters narrower wingspan. The upper fuselage was trimmed down and a streamlined bubble canopy used instead. The internal fuel tank was 90 gallons smaller than the Hellcat, a roughly 35% decrease. But the fact that the Bearcat was a lot lighter meant that the impact on range wasn't all that much. Another key improvement, both for weight and for speed, was smoothing out the panels of the aircraft. Many parts of the Hellcat have been built for ease of construction and repair. If you look at the rear of the plane, you can see lots of small, simple panels with raised rivets. These all cause drag. Same with the simple yet inefficient front intake below the engine. The Bearcat would be a lot more similar to the F4U Corsair, being constructed of fewer, more complex panels with flush rivets and moving the intakes for the coolers to the wing's leading edge. This helped to reduce the drag on the aircraft, increasing speed at the cost of complexity. The later Wildcats, the Hellcats and many other Grumman carrier aircraft all used Grumman's stow wing, essentially folding the wing close to the root and rotating it to sit alongside the fuselage to store them more compactly. The Bearcat did not do this, opting for a simpler fold much closer to the wing tip. This made the aircraft take up a lot more room, but allowed Grumman to avoid the heavy stow wing mechanism. Moving the fold to the end meant that the new mechanism would experience significantly less force during maneuvers, so it could be relatively lightly constructed. In fact, the entire wing was a lot weaker structurally than that of the Hellcat or even the Wildcat. Naturally, this saved a lot of weight, but came with a pesky downside, a lower G limit. While many World War II combat aircraft could endure about as much G-force as their pilots, so 10 to 12 Gs, the Bearcat could not. Somewhere after 7.5 G, the lightweight wings would simply snap. These kinds of forces were not uncommon if you were pulling out of a dive, especially for such a fast aircraft. So they made the wing snap on purpose. Yes, the Bearcat had safety tips. They deliberately made the wing tips weaker than the rest of the wing, snapping them off at 7.5 Gs. This would reduce the forces acting on the remaining wing section and leave the pilot with just enough wing to limp back to the carrier and land safely, where new wing tips could be fitted. However, in reality this mechanism didn't really work, and often only one tip would shear off. This made the aircraft essentially uncontrollable, especially if you were at low altitude. The solution, of course, in true American fashion, was to simply add explosives. The idea was that once one wingtip sheared off, the other would immediately be blown off. Except often the explosives didn't go off properly, or went off when they weren't supposed to. It also made the aircraft very dangerous to work on, so they soon scrapped the idea, reinforced the wings with spars, and told the pilots not to exceed 7.5 G. Anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. The point is, by making the Bearcat shorter, thinner, smoother and weaker, they had managed to save more than half a ton of weight, around 1,600 pounds. The Bearcat was now a similar size and weight to something like a Focke-Wulf 190, with a massively more powerful engine and all the extra stuff required to operate on a carrier. This was an incredible aircraft. It offered unmatched low-altitude performance and could climb to higher altitudes at extreme speeds, with an F8F Bearcat being able to take off in just 35 meters and climb to 10,000 feet in just 94 seconds. That record, set in 1946, was not beaten for 10 years. It boasted a top speed of 455 miles per hour, some 60 miles per hour faster than the Hellcat and 120 miles per hour faster than the Wildcat. It was so manoeuvrable that it would later become the aircraft of choice for the Blue Angels until it was replaced by the F9F Panther. To create such a beast there had been sacrifices, but these were, with the exception of the disastrous safety tips, proven to be worth it. But the Bearcat did have one glaring weakness that couldn't be solved. It was late. First flying in August 1944, the F8F Bearcat didn't enter service until February 1945, with the first squadrons only entering operational service in May. The war ended before the Bearcats had flown any combat missions. So there you have it. The Wildcat held the line, the Hellcat won the war, and the Bearcat, well, it showed just how far American aircraft design had come in 4 short years. Which one would you want to fly? All 3 of these aircraft deserved more screen time than I could realistically give them today, so apologies for the lack of detail. Of course, there are 2 other cats I didn't even discuss, the Tiger Cat and the Tomcat, but hopefully you understand why these are a little less relevant. Likewise, I wish I could have talked more about the duels between the Wildcats, Hellcats and the Zeros, but that'll be a dogfight video at some point, I'm sure. No promises though. If you now know the difference between the F4F, F6F and F8F, then do please leave a like down below and comment which comparison videos you'd like to see next. Make sure to subscribe for more content like this, or considering supporting this channel on Patreon like these lovely people. You get early, ad-free access to all my videos, exclusive content, and entry into our little Discord server for as little as $5 a month. Lovely. Anyway, I'll see you all next time.